Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's webinar, Best Practices in Early Learning from Other States, brought to you by NCSL. All lines have been placed on a listen-only mode to provide favorable sound quality during today's presentation. If you would like to submit a question or comment at any time during the webinar, you may either use the chat box located on the lower right-hand side of your screen, or to ask your question by phone, you may press star 1 on your telephone keypad. If you should require assistance throughout the conference, please press star 0 to reach a live operator. At this time, it is my pleasure to turn the floor over to your host, Julie Poppy. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being on today's webinar, Best Practices in Early Learning from Other States, the first of 4 webinars for the Early Learning Fellows. We have an exciting webinar planned, and we know that some of you are on the phone, too, so we're glad that you could join us. I'd like to remind the fellows that the webinar topics are part of your feedback, and these next 3 webinars we hope will provide a forum to learn and exchange ideas to hear from other states. As a reminder, we have our next webinar coming up on Friday, April 13th, Expanding on the Science with Jack Shonkoff with the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University, and Ron Haskins with the Brookings Institution, who co-directs the Brookings Center on Children and Families. We'll send out more information soon about how to register. We also have a webinar scheduled for Friday, June 8th with Bob Pianta, and he's with the Curry School of Education. And he'll talk about revolutionizing early childhood teaching. There will be more details to follow in the next month or so. So, please let us know if you have any ideas for future webinars. You'll be given an opportunity to share any ideas you have for the future webinar through a survey, and I'll tell you more about that at the end of the webinar. Stephanie Collier is also on the line, and in a few minutes she'll talk about the goals of today's webinar. And we're going to try to make this webinar as interactive as possible. You have an opportunity to ask questions either through your computer or by the phone, and the webinar operator will explain how to ask questions. So at this time, I'd like to invite the operator back on the line to just let us know how to do that.
Thank you. To ask a question by phone, simply press star 1 on your telephone keypad at any time. That is star 1 on your telephone keypad to ask a question by phone. In order to ask a question by web chat, you would simply type the question into the box located on the lower right-hand side of your screen and then click on the send button.
Great. So now I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie Clothier, who will walk us through today's goals and introduce our speakers.
Great. Thank you, Julie. So good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to have you on the line. I know I wish we were all in the same room together, but I'm glad at least we can be on the phone together. So I'm actually going to talk for a minute about some of the NCSL resources that we have, and then I'm going to introduce our speakers. So first one I wanted to just mention as we think about resources for you and ways that you can get best practices and good ideas from other states. So the first one I wanted to mention is our legislative database. That's a database that we update every 2 weeks. It's a NCSL Early Care and Education legislative database, and we make it available to you so that you can search it by topic, you can search it by word or year, and you can get both proposed legislation as well as enacted legislation. So if you're thinking about different early childhood issues, that's a good place to go, and we'll make sure that you know and have the link to that resource. We can also help you with legislation. You might be interested in proposing a bill on a particular topic, and we can work with your bill drafters or work with you to share bills from other states that might be relevant to you. So feel free to call us if you have questions about legislation that you might be interested in proposing or thinking about in the coming year or years. We can also do research for you. We can send you research on topics that you're interested in working on, examples from other states or more academic research. Whatever kind of research you're interested in, we can find it for you. I also wanted to just highlight a couple of publications that are coming out that you can expect to see, and if they're of interest to you, you can feel free to download those. We are finishing right now a legislator's guide to home visiting. We currently have an advisory group of legislators who are providing input onto the home visiting guide, and we'll send that to you when it's finished. If there's anyone on the line that's interested in being a reviewer of that guide, feel free to let us know, and we can make sure that you see a draft of it as well. We also have a Legis brief, which is a very short 2-page brief that's coming out on early childhood data systems. That'll be out in February, and you'll all receive copies of that. And then as part of our work with the scientific community, the Frontiers of Innovation work, as we talked about last December, we also plan to write 2 case studies of new innovations that have particularly important implications for state policy. So you can look for those once we've had a chance to write them. We also have just reached out to a number of states, and actually it's a number of the states who are speakers today, Ohio, Washington, and Maryland, to talk about potential work on infusing executive function, which is another area that we talked about in December, into early learning standards and assessments. So we're going to be exploring that with a couple of states, and if you're interested in being involved in any of these efforts, please feel free to let us know. I also wanted to mention requests for information. We've received a number of requests for information from you on different topics, and I just wanted to encourage you to keep doing that. So far, we've heard from you on child care regulations, on early learning councils, on the Louisiana Child Care Tax Credit, as well as other issues. The other thing that's been really fun since we saw you last December is that we have heard from you about things that you're working on. And again, we'd really like to continue to hear from you. We know, for example, one of you is convening a working group on early childhood in their state. And that's the kind of thing that's great to know that you're doing, and if there are ways that we can help support you in those efforts, please let us know. So I think that's where I'm going to wrap up on the NCSL resources, but we just wanted to give you a sense of things in the works and things that you'll be able to have access to that are on these early learning topics. So now I'm going to, with great pleasure, introduce our speakers. I'm actually going to introduce, I think, the first 2 speakers first, and then I'm going to introduce our second 2, because what we're planning to do with our agenda today is to hear from Representative Ruth Kagi from Washington first, who's going to make some remarks about Washington. Then we're going to hear from Senator Lehner from Ohio. Then we're going to open up the phone lines and the computer lines and ask if you have any questions. So we hope that if there is a set of questions that come up right after those 2 speakers, that you'll ask those then. And then we'll hear from our next 2 speakers and again have another round of questions and answers so that you have more than one opportunity to be able to ask questions. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to make a couple of remarks about what we hope you'll get out of these speakers today, and then make the first introduction. So I think we're really hoping that you'll learn 3 things from today's webinar. The first one is really how different state leaders are approaching their early learning challenges. You'll see a number of different strategies in the presentations today, and we hope that those will give you some different ideas. We also hope that you'll see a number of different policy ideas across these different presentations. So you'll hear about child care, you'll hear about quality rating systems, you'll hear about assessment systems, and a number of other issues. So we hope that you'll walk away with a set of new policy ideas as well as approaches. And then finally, this is a session on best practices. So we really hope that you will have a sense of these particular states and how they are really focusing on research-based and successful practices. So we hope that you'll get some really good thinking from that. Okay, so let me introduce our first speaker, Representative Ruth Kagi. She chairs the House Early Learning and Human Services Committee. And what you'll see from her PowerPoint and from her presentation are a number of bills and efforts over the years that really make a lot of sense in terms of covering a range of topics, improving quality, and covering the full age range in early learning. So you're going to hear quite a bit from Representative Kagi about those efforts. And I also wanted to mention that if you haven't seen them, we posted a number of resources on the website with this webinar that are really good background materials for you. So if there's something, we tried to anticipate the kind of areas you might be interested in and posted those resources. So a number of the bills, for example, that Representative Kagi is going to talk about are already on the website. Then we have Senator Lehner from Ohio, and she chairs the Senate Education Committee and is one of the co-chairs of Ohio's newly created Children's Caucus. And she's going to share her perspective on how legislators are thinking about early childhood in the context of a broad array of children's issues. So we're very pleased to have both of you here. I'm going to pass the baton over to Representative Higgy, who will kick us off today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steph. And thank you for this opportunity. In looking at the journey we've been on for about the last 7 years, it's very clear to me that, number one, NCSL had everything to do with building the solid foundation of really education of legislators on these issues and exposing us to the scientists who have really convinced us that this is the most critical issue we should be addressing and that it is very cost effective for us to invest in early learning programs. So we really, when about 7 years ago, we were having a tough time getting anything through the legislature dealing with early learning because there was a strong voice that said this is the family's business. The state has no business getting into the lives of families of when their children are very young. And that we overcame that as a result of the NCSL symposium that was held right before the annual conference about 6 years ago. And it was the scientists, Dr. Pat Kuhl from the University of Washington and Dr. Jack Shonkoff from Harvard, who really presented the science of both the promise of early learning and how exciting it is to watch young children learn and the impact that serve and return and that relationship building has on building the foundation of their brain, but also kind of the dark side of child development that Dr. Shonkoff and the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child has really put together the research on the damage that adverse circumstances have on the developing brain. So it's both the promise side and the threatening side of early childhood that has driven our policy. As a result of those presentations, as well as I believe Art Rolnick was there talking about the return on investment of early childhood, there was a senator from, I believe, Tennessee who talked about the investment they've made in pre-K and how they have done that. I think they taxed beer. But it was just very exciting, and the potential benefit to the state of investing in early childhood became clear to people with very conservative views who all of a sudden realized that this is the way we could turn around all the remedial work, not all of it, but a lot of the remedial work we're doing in K-12, that we could avoid so many of the social costs that come from neglect and abuse of children and just the failure of children to get ready for school, get ready for kindergarten. So that's been our focus ever since that symposium. We did create an early learning council in 2005, which really tried to develop a very broad early childhood plan. And that formed the foundation for a lot of the legislation that followed in the next few years. We created a Department of Early Learning, and I believe it was the first in the country, but in any event, it really provided a focal point for policy development, and it was at the request of the business community who said, we want to work with the state and partner with the state to support improving early learning across the state, but we can't do that when you have fragmented programs cut across 3 or 4 different state agencies. So the Department of Early Learning has really provided that focal point. We also, in that bill, authorized the creation of a public-private partnership, which is Thrive by 5, and that partnership has helped us immensely in moving the early learning agenda forward. They have really helped with education of the public, which is something the state struggles with, public education campaigns. And they also have been able to step in these tough budget times. And when we were unable to sustain any support for quality rating and improvement systems, Thrive by 5 stepped in, and with private funding, they funded the pilots to really demonstrate how that program could move forward. So they've been an enormous help and have really done research in different arenas to help us base our state policy on. So once the Department of Early Learning was formed, the quality rating and improvement system was something we really focused on, and it was authorized, but again, we didn't have funding for it. So Thrive moved that forward, and they were able to do research on what really is effective in improving quality. And through a research report issued by Mathematica, there was a significant improvement in quality as a result of the coaching that was done. So that really helped form the foundation for our Race to the Top grant, was that what we learned from that QRIS pilot and the research around it. The other bill that we passed in 2007 was the home visiting bill, and it requires that the state fund evidence-based and research-based home visiting programs. And we created a matching fund because the private sector really was interested in partnering with the state to fund evidence-based home visiting. That program is now administered by Thrive by 5, our public-private partnership, and is showing very robust results, and the federal money is going into that matching fund as well, and Thrive is seeking additional private dollars. Last year, we have a state preschool program for low-income children called ECAP, the Early Childhood Education and Assistance Program. But it's only serving about 40% of the ECAP and Head Start are serving about 40% of the eligible children. So last year, we passed a bill that basically created an entitlement for all educationally disadvantaged children, but it had a phased-in implementation. And because Washington has faced such severe budget shortfalls, we've cut about $10 billion out of our budget the last 3 years and are facing another $1.5 billion this session we're in right now. We have not been able to expand coverage. So that is a continuing dilemma, is how do we muster the resources in this really difficult budgetary environment to expand our pre-kindergarten program. There is no question that it's a good investment, but we are struggling with that, and we have a bill before us this year that would expand to a universal preschool program over the next 15 years. And I honestly do not know if we'll be able to move that forward because there are so many concerns about creating future expectations when we don't have the resources to fund our programs now. One bill that we are going to be able to pass this year, I believe, that's on the floor of the House today, is WAKIDS, and this is the Washington Kindergarten Inventory of Developmental Skills. It is a kindergarten assessment that was piloted in 5 communities in 2010, and it was enthusiastically received by teachers and parents and early learning providers who really are pulled together in a process of helping a kindergarten teacher understand exactly what the strengths and weaknesses of a child are as they come into kindergarten, and engage the parent in the educational process from the very beginning. So we want to expand that statewide within the next couple of years, and that is one of the foundation pieces of our Race to the Top grant. So it's critical that we provide the statutory base for that expansion. There are, in addition to helping a kindergarten teacher and that child enter the school successfully, obviously the other thing we're interested in is a uniform measurement of children's skills. And in a number of the bills moving forward this year, we have referenced a longitudinal study because we have learned so much from the Chicago Parent Center, the longitudinal study that they've done from 1967, the Perry Preschool, the Abecedarian research. Those are the research tools that I think really move us forward in our policy. So we are trying to establish the foundation for a longitudinal study for Washington over the next several decades, and assure that we have valid research on the impact of our pre-kindergarten programs, the impact of our quality rating and improvement system, the impact of every investment we're making in early childhood, so we can perfect our work and we can really know what needs to be improved and what we need to build on. So every year we have continued to put another brick into this house we're building. And if there's any word of advice I have for other legislators, it's to really use the research and the scientists to build this enthusiasm for early learning. I think of where we were 7 years ago and where we are now. It just really is remarkable. And we have engaged such a range of stakeholders in our communities who are talking to our legislators and supporting them in moving forward. We had United Ways from every community across our state here yesterday talking to legislators, and their number one agenda item is early learning. They are talking about WCAG and quality rating and improvement system, and pre-K. They're talking about all those pieces. So engaging stakeholders is very helpful. We have a very active Fight Crime Invest in Kids group here in the state, and there is not a hearing that we don't have a sheriff or police chief there talking about the importance of early learning and citing the research. And several police chiefs have said this is the most important investment you can make. This is more important than funding more police officers. It's quite remarkable. And the business community in this state is a very strong ally, and I think can help you a great deal because they understand the value of this investment. So with that, I'm going to stop.
Thank you so much, Representative Kagi. That was terrific. I don't know how you summarized, the last 6 years so well. It was great. Thank you. I'm going to now turn it over. Yes.
I'm afraid there's a foster care bill coming up on the floor, so I'm going to have to leave you.
Okay. So
I'm very sorry. I wish I could hear to Ohio.
That's fine. Representative Kagi is one of our faculty, so we will, if you have questions that you want to direct directly to her, send them to Julie Poppy, and we'll get them to her and get you an answer. I'm going to pass it over to Senator Lehner now, and if you could take the floor, that would be great. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today, and thank you all for your interest in early childhood education. I don't think Ohio is especially well known for its work in early childhood. We have gone back and forth on whether or not to even require all-day kindergarten, let alone even begin to consider universal pre-K. But I think that's changing. I was interested in hearing from Washington that they really tried to get past this whole idea that early childhood is a family's responsibility, et cetera, because that certainly is a sentiment that I have heard in Ohio. But like I said, I think that really is starting to change. We've had two significant developments this year that I think are driving the train on early childhood. One, of course, was winning $70 million in the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge. Nothing like a grant of that size to spark interest among legislators. But the issue that I've been asked to specifically talk about today was the creation of our Children's Caucus. We have had a number of various caucuses come and go over the years, like the Mental Health Caucus, the Cancer Caucus, and some others, all of which I'm involved in, and they're helpful, but I have never seen any caucus garner quite the interest that the Children's Caucus that we just created this past fall has apparently garnered. It's got a bipartisan leadership, a member of the House a Democrat and a Republican in both chambers. So there's four of us that are co-chairing this. And we have a number of private sector partners who participate and help us actually kind of drive the caucus, which is one of its keys to success, because anytime you leave something up to legislative office, you all know how scattered that gets. So it's very helpful to have the Advocates for Ohio's Future, Groundworks, Voices for Children, et cetera, participate in the caucus and help us drive it. We did have an initial meeting the beginning of December where we had Dr. Judy Cameron came and she provided absolutely fascinating information about how early experiences affect the quality of brain architecture that creates either a sturdy or a fragile foundation for all the learning, health, and behavior that follows. And I would highly recommend to anyone who is engaged in this field that you might want to look into Dr. Cameron's work a little bit in more depth. You can find her work she's done a paper called The Science of Early Childhood Development, and you can find that at www.developingchild.harvard.edu. I think that's easy enough to remember. So I would really recommend you go to that. But I think what having Dr. Cameron did for the caucus was to expose legislators to the very important information that it is our earliest experiences that are going to impact not only whether a child's going to be successful in school, but impact so many other elements, so many other issues that we deal with. You probably have all heard that you can basically predict how many prison beds you're going to need by the number of kids who are not proficient in reading by the end of third grade. And you can predict who's not going to be efficient in reading by who's not prepared for kindergarten when they arrive. And that's predicted by the experiences that they have, when they're 6, 7, 8 months old. All of this is such a continuum, and Dr. Cameron's work really brought that home to us, I believe. It was amazing to me that not only were legislators engaged interested in the caucus, but the afternoon after we had our kickoff luncheon, I had 6 different agencies within the administration show up at my office doorstep wanting to know if they could work with us and if we could take up some cause that they had. And that has continued almost on a daily basis, believe it or not, since December, where one group or another shows up in my office and says this is an issue, whether it's immunizations or bicycle safety or whatever. Can the Children's Caucus help us? Which kind of is telling me that people have had a difficult time somehow bringing forth issues related to children's, different children's issues within the legislature. that they somehow see this caucus that's focusing on that as a vehicle that they can finally use to be a voice for them in the legislature. And I just mention that because I find that kind of interesting. It's obviously struck a chord, and the hopes that they can do some things in a bipartisan manner is encouraging to people. And, of course, I think it's somewhat also reflective of the fact that we let everything and anything get tied up in partisanship, and children's issues is not immune from that, but I think it is an issue that we could all come together on and absolutely agree on what to do. As I shared with Julie as we were setting up this webinar, we really don't know what the caucus is going to be focusing on in the months ahead. We're still trying to discern what issues are the most pressing and where we can be most effective. Certainly no shortage of suggestions. I think it's kind of funny, the legislators out there recognize this dilemma. We sent out a survey to all of the senators and the representatives listing a variety of different children's issues that we could be engaged in and asked them just to rank them. And the leadership in both caucuses came back and said, no, we don't want anyone filling out these surveys because it might appear on campaign literature that this legislator's concerned about this one but not concerned about that one, and so on and so forth. So I just kind of had a smile about that. We'll figure a way around that. We've got to maybe have to go in and do one-on-one meet and greets to determine our priorities. So I continue to be very hopeful that this caucus is going to make a big difference. I think that if I had to pick an issue that we're going to really grab hold of here for the next 6 months, is going to be around helping set up the programs to take advantage of the $70 million grant that we had and start to create a good structure around early childhood education in the state of Ohio, which we have not had. Our two focuses on that grant are going to be getting children ready to start kindergarten, make sure that they have those skills that they need, and then secondly, driving the quality of the preschool programs that we do have in existence to make sure that they are actually the kind of programs that are going to give children those skills that they need to be ready for kindergarten. You're going to hear a lot more on the grant a little bit later on from Stephanie Siddons, who's going to talk about what our early childhood learning grant is actually going to accomplish. And with that, I will wrap it up and certainly open to any questions if there's any out there.
Thanks so much, Senator Lehner. This is Julie Poppe with NCSL. Yeah, at this time we're going to check in with our participants just to see if there are any burning questions out there. So I'm going to ask the operator to come back on again and remind the folks how to ask a question.
Thank you. The floor is open for questions. If you do have a question, please press *1 on your telephone keypad at this time. Again, that is *1 to ask a question. Or, of course, you may submit a question by web chat. Use the web feature on the lower right-hand side of your screen. One moment while we poll for phone questions. There are no phone questions at this time. Okay, well that's fine. We'll wait for questions after the next one. Thank you very much, Senator Lehner.
Thank you.
We're gonna continue on with our presentations. So I'm going to introduce our next two speakers who will add a lot of additional policy ideas to these first two presentations. So the next speaker is going to be Stephanie Siddons. She is the Director of the Office of Early Learning in the Ohio Department of Education. And under Governor Kasich in Ohio, Ohio is transforming both healthcare and leading the country in early childhood as one of the winners of the Early Learning Challenge Race to the Top grant. And we are really pleased to have Stephanie here to talk today about where Ohio is planning to go with their early learning efforts. So I'm going to hand it over. Well, actually, I'm going to introduce Rolf, too, so that I can hand it over to him next. So before I let you go, Stephanie, I'm going to introduce our fourth speaker. Our final speaker is going to be Rolf Grafwellner. He is the Assistant State Superintendent at the Maryland Department of Education. And we have asked him to approach his presentation a little bit differently. Maryland has, somewhat similar to Washington, sort of a long trajectory of early learning efforts. And he's going to talk about the very ambitious goal that Maryland set for its early learning programs. And then he's going to talk about not only the goal that they set, but the progress they made and how they got there. So these are going to be terrific presentations, and I'm going to pass it over to Stephanie now.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you about Ohio's work. I'm going to just give you a little bit of an overview of what we have in Ohio in terms of the numbers of children and programs and some of the policy legislative commitments we've made in the last 5 years, and then talk about the Early Learning Challenge grant that we were awarded and the reforms we have planned over the next 4 years and moving forward. So just a little bit about our status in Ohio. We're a large state. We have 720,000 children under the age of 6, and almost 55% of those children are considered high needs, and that means that they are from families that have low incomes, or that their native language is not English, or they may have an identified disability or delay. Or it could be a combination of those factors. In addition, we have around 11,000 early learning and development programs throughout the state that we license or certify, and that is across sectors of public district programs to family child care programs to child care center-based programs, and those programs have the capacity to serve around 300,000 children for the birth to age 5 population. So we have significant numbers of programs that we're interested in really impacting and improving the quality, and a large number of children that we're needing to ensure are working towards being ready to enter kindergarten. So in Ohio, we are operating with having different state agencies that have responsibility for different programs, birth to age 5. So there are kind of 4 major state agencies that touch or administer or fund early learning programs. So the Department of Education, the agency that I'm from, has our state pre-kindergarten program, which focuses on children from low-income families. We also have preschool special education. We also license public district preschool programs for safety, health, and health compliance. We are responsible for administering the kindergarten readiness assessment statewide in our state, and then we also have responsibility for developing and monitoring pre-kindergarten standards. We also have our Department of Job and Family Services that has responsibility for the Child Care Development Fund, which focuses on subsidized child care and family child care settings, and they also license family and child care settings, and then also have the Early Childhood Advisory Council. And then our Department of Health has responsibility for early intervention programs and home visiting. And then we also have our Department of Mental Health that has responsibility for early childhood mental health consultation and mental health treatment programs. So what we're doing now is really these agencies are working together as we move forward on, especially with our Early Learning Challenge grant reforms. So it's really been a nice opportunity to work toward a common goal. But just a few comments about our recent legislation or policy practices that we've implemented before we were awarded the grant. As other states have done, we created an Early Childhood Advisory Council, and this is based on the federal statute for the Head Start Act that has states create early childhood advisory councils. But in Ohio, we also put into our legislation that it was required that the governor create the Early Childhood Advisory Council and serve as an advisory body to partner with the governor regarding early learning and development. So this has been, the Early Childhood Advisory Council in our state has been instrumental in providing a number of recommendations, policy recommendations as we move forward, really focusing on promoting family-centered programs and services that support social, emotional, cognitive, and physical development of children. We also have really focused, we've been awarded state longitudinal data system grants, two of them actually in Ohio, that has really helped us focus on reforms that will allow us to collect data and house that data centrally from birth to post-secondary. Around the early childhood side, we've been able to expand the unique child identifier that is assigned to pre-kindergarten through grade 12 children to at least our early intervention students who are in Part C of IDEA, to allow us to sufficiently follow children as they transition from Part C to Part B of IDEA. So that's really helped us not just reporting to the federal government about our progress, but helped us look at information more closely and will serve us as the research and evaluation agenda moving forward. And we'll do a number of additional reforms related to the longitudinal data system, where we're currently looking at all of our early childhood data systems to see how we can bring them together and feed into the K-12 data system as well as post-secondary. We also have targeted funding to child care programs to meet higher quality standards. So by this I mean that we established enhanced reimbursement ceilings for programs that participate in our tiered quality rating and improvement system now. This is focused on child care programs, so this funding helps programs maintain their quality ratings that they achieve moving forward. We also developed a common outcomes framework for Part C and B of IDEA. So these programs collect common information about children with disabilities from birth to age 5 around positive social emotional skills, their acquisition and use of knowledge and skills, and their use of appropriate behaviors to meet their needs. So this, again, information helps contribute to longitudinal information. And we also had a home visiting evidence-based program redesign. So we really wanted to utilize scientific research and evidence to inform our efforts around home visiting. We initially were using a broad set of eligibility criteria to support pregnant mothers, but we determined from looking at research that it's most effective to focus deeply on low-income first-time mothers and have more intensive services for those mothers, and that has really been instrumental in moving that program forward. And then another reform has been related to an automated time and attendance system for our publicly funded child care. So this has really helped us get real-time utilization data to inform policy decisions and more consistently have information about eligibility and, again, utilization of child care as children are participating in those programs. So moving forward, we, as Senator Lehner pointed out, we were very lucky and thrilled to receive the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge Grant, which lays out our bold and aggressive reform agenda to close the kindergarten readiness gap and in particular to increase access to high-quality services. So in Ohio, we established these key goals for results. By the time the grant is over, which is in 2015, we would like to add 1,300 newly rated programs in our system, which is a tiered quality rating and improvement system. So these would be existing programs that we want to have rated and be determined to be high-quality settings. And then in those programs, we would be serving 37,000 high-needs children So those children would then be getting services in highly rated programs. And we also want to close the kindergarten readiness gap by 5% for these high needs children. We know from looking at 6 years of our kindergarten readiness assessment literacy data that we have about a 25 to 30% gap in the entering skills of kindergarten children for high needs children relative to their more advantaged peers. So we'd like to reduce this gap in the period of the grant. And then by 2020, our ultimate goal is to ensure that we're funding or purchasing services only in high-quality settings. So we will use these goals to implement a number of reforms. So I'll talk a little bit about each of those very briefly. So one of our major reforms is having focused, accountable leadership to achieve these goals. Ohio created an infrastructure to support the early learning reform agenda. Governor Kasich in our state released an executive order in October that established a direct point of accountability for early learning in Ohio, and that is through the Early Education and Development Officer position. This position will report to the Governor's Office of 21st Century Education, and this appointment would ensure alignment across our educational system from birth to post-secondary. And really the officer would be accountable for helping us to achieve the goals in our grant and then really help to coordinate policy and break down silos across the state agencies that I talked about earlier, which have responsibility for early childhood programs. And then the governor would continue to be advised by our Early Childhood Advisory Council. And then we wanted to ensure that a private sector thread runs through early learning policy in our state. So we created the Early Education and Development Innovation Committee. And this committee would be comprised of senior leaders from 2 prominent Ohio businesses, as well as a philanthropic organization, and then a major research organization, as well as a children's healthcare organization. And so these individuals on the committee would really ensure that the voice of the private sector is consistently brought to our discussions of early childhood education policy. And then the committee would provide leadership to mobilize business partnerships, and then help us think about private sector tools and resources to inform our policies and practices. And then the committee would continue to work with the Early Education and Development Officer to really help disseminate information to the legislature, local community leaders, and the public about the state of school readiness in Ohio. And then we also created project teams that would include senior state agency staff and other key leaders to really focus on 4 key areas, which would be assessment and standards, professional development, quality access and financing, and then family support and engagement. So it's through, and many of these elements are to be, the officer position hasn't yet been hired. The Innovation Committee is about to be organized. So these efforts are really new and underway just now. So it's through this infrastructure that we really want to make a difference and implement the reforms in our grant. So another key reform that actually we'll be working with our colleagues in Maryland to do is to have a comprehensive assessment system. So the 2 states, Ohio and Maryland, wanted to collaborate to develop a pre-kindergarten and kindergarten formative assessment system, as well as a new kindergarten entry assessment that would focus on all domains of school readiness. And so we will be collaborating not just on the assessment development, but on common professional development for educators, as well as to develop a technology framework. And we plan to implement our new assessments in the 2014-2015 school year. We each bring our own history of success with implementing kindergarten entry assessments, and so and we also have very active and interested business communities in our kindergarten readiness assessment efforts. So our business communities are very interested in working with each other on this cross-state collaboration. And then we expect them to spend time with us as well in helping to report these results and again, support our efforts. So that is an exciting opportunity. And then another reform is our tiered quality rating improvement system. We have a strong system already in Ohio that's voluntary for child care programs, and we will be expanding that system to include all types of programs from public districts to family child care. And then through this process, we'll have expanded and common program standards as well as test incentives for programs to move up to higher levels of quality. And then we'll have a cost and validation study that will help us understand how much does this cost for programs to participate and move up to different levels of quality, and then is the program, the tier quality rating and improvement system, clearly differentiating levels of quality to ensure that we're validating the quality determinations. We also will be implementing a number of reforms related to supporting and developing workforce. So here we will be expanding our standards to include all domains of readiness as well as have supporting assessments. So we will have a birth to kindergarten entry professional development system to really support our educators in the use of these standards and assessments. We really want to support educators around young English language learners' needs in the classroom, so we plan to form an early English language learner advisory group as well as supporting professional development. And then we also will have our departments of health and mental health will be partners with us in deploying cadres of health promotion consultants and early childhood mental health consultants to really support educators in programs that are serving high-needs children around social emotional development as well as physical well-being and motor development. So those are some of our key reforms. And then we also want to support educator competencies and growth by working with 2- and 4-year institutions. So really that's a quick overview of some of our big reforms. We, of course, have a number of other initiatives in our grant, but those are some of the highlights. And moving forward, what we will be doing is in making some changes to our legislation to support these reform efforts. So, for example, mandating participation in our tiered quality rating and improvement system by publicly funded early childhood programs. We'll be looking to use a common unique identifier for children birth to age 5 that would link to K-12 and post-secondary that would help us with collecting information at the child level that links to program quality. And then we also would like to have our kindergarten readiness assessment results reported on local report cards. And then we will require participation in our pre-kindergarten assessments that would be developed as part of our Maryland collaboration. So those are just some examples of changes to statute that would support the reform efforts. So again, that was a quick overview. I'm happy to answer questions later. But again, we are excited about the opportunity in the grant, and I'll turn it back over to Julie or Stephanie. Thanks.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was great. You've got a lot on your plate for the upcoming year. So thank you for sharing, and particularly those last few comments about the particular legislative policy that you're going to have to change. So now I'm going to turn it over to Rolf Grafwallner from Maryland, and he's going to give you a tour of really Maryland's experience with setting a goal for school readiness and then the kinds of things they needed to do to get there. Thank you, Rolf.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and good afternoon. Pleased to talk about Maryland's story over the last 10 years and how it would feed into our new Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge reform efforts for the next 4 years. So rather than talking about what we're going to do in the future, I wanted to give you some sense as to what we've done in the past and basically walk you through this process. You look at this trend line, and you can see that with the metrics that we established in kindergarten of kindergarten information, kindergarten teacher information on incoming kindergartners over the last 10 years, that on a composite score of essential indicators of learning, we have really seen a trend upwards from 49% of children being fully ready to 81% being fully ready in the most recent data gathering that we did last year. and the number of children that are in the developing category indicating significant deficiencies and skills has really gone down as well. This trend line is a reflection of the reform efforts that have been put in place 12 years ago by a legislative body, the Joint Committee on Children, Youth, and Families. They worked with the result area children entering school ready to learn, and we used kindergarten entry assessment as our performance measure to determine whether children are better off as a result of these kinds of innovative initiatives that we've put in place. And there are quite a number of those that we have managed to implement. Just an overview of the state. It's considerably smaller than Ohio, so you can see that the numbers are smaller. We are in an advantage that we have 24 local school systems that are county-wide, and so the work that we establish in the state is with less jurisdictions than other states that have a greater number of school districts to work with. That's an advantage, and that's something that I think has really enhanced our work in Maryland. We have a very diverse population in Maryland. As you can see, a large number of Hispanic or Latino children, and that really accounts for the kind of work that's done in early childhood education as well as in K-12. The direct services, that's very important to note because through a landmark bill on school finance in Maryland, the so-called Bridge to Excellence in Public Schools Act, in the early part of the past decade, the legislature included provisions for full-day kindergarten, which was fully implemented by 2007, and established pre-kindergarten as an entitlement for all economically disadvantaged 4-year-olds. At that point, we can say that 35% of all 4-year-olds are in our public school-based pre-kindergarten programs, and that about 42% of those are going on to kindergarten. We have licensed programs. Maryland has a strong child care licensing history. The licensing standards are fairly rigorous, and all programs that provide care other than, say, ad hoc babysitting or other kind of arrangements where parents and children come together must be licensed in the state. That includes centers, family child care homes, nursery schools, and Head Start programs. We have also a strong and very successful program with our infants and toddlers and preschoolers that have been identified with disabilities or delays. And then a very interesting feature in Maryland has been for the last 30 years the so-called family support centers. Out of the child welfare bill that was put in place, we've established a number of centers in very low-income neighborhoods to work with pregnant children, pregnant mothers and their children, especially children birth to 3, on parenting, adult education, and early childhood services. The quality improvement initiatives that we've put in place are very similar to what you've heard from Ohio. We're working with the same kind of policy tools that other states are using, such as a quality rating system, improving our program standards, and tying it to early childhood accreditation. We also want to make sure that we have early learning standards birth to 5, and establish other means to work with our child care community, such as resource and referral services, early childhood mental health consultation for children with challenging behaviors, things that we can address early on in the child care sector. And then we have a number of initiatives that are unique to Maryland. For instance, the Judy Center partnerships. Let me just take a minute to explain that. This is basically a partnership with a Title I school and its early childhood programs in the Title I attendance area. The focus is school readiness and to make sure that the school, as well as all early childhood partners, that could be child care centers, Head Start programs, family support centers, other services such as library services, health services, work hand in hand to make sure that children from birth to 5 would transition successfully into public schools. And especially for children with so-called at-risk factors would be addressed through those partnerships. And we have been putting those in place and implemented that over the last 10 years, and we have seen significant results, especially for our English language learners and for our children from low-income backgrounds. Of course, as you heard from Stephanie from Ohio, we have a longitudinal data system linking up our early childhood histories of children to the longitudinal data system for K-12. And then we have also a very interesting feature within the IDEA, that's the law that governs children with disabilities. We've had over the last few years extended individualized family service plan and extended IFSP for our young children, not just to age 3 but beyond to age 5, which is a very important feature to make sure that children are in least restrictive environments. Children with disabilities receive the services to meet their potential. This is the governance structure. In 2005, the legislature was very instrumental in establishing a transfer of all child care services into the Department of Education. It included other services as well, so that at the time in 2005, we've established all early care and education services within the Department of Education. That's facilitated primarily through my division of early childhood development, which I am the chief of, and also with the Division of Special Education Early Intervention Services. Of course, all regulations and policies are adopted by our State Board of Education, and works very closely with the legislature in making sure that the focus and the governor's policies in terms of early childhood are being met. We also have our State Advisory Council on Early Childhood Education, which by executive order was established in 2008. The Children's Cabinet is a feature that's out of the governor's office to make sure that all child-serving agencies work very closely on 8 result areas, of which children entering school ready to learn is one. And that Children's Cabinet was very instrumental in helping us develop strategies to implement the quality initiatives that I just spoke of. This is just an organizational chart in terms of how our early childhood services are being organized within the department. As you can see, it cuts across different divisions. Library services, for instance, is within our department. I have to say, especially in early childhood education, you can do a lot of wonderful initiatives with the library services that are community-oriented and reach a wide, a great number of families who are using library services for their young children. And of course, our food and nutrition program is also within the department. We've really worked with a system of collaboration, and here I'm just giving you some sense as to what we were focusing on in order to make sure that the services that were established at the state level are getting translated down to the local level. And we used a number of ways and initiatives to facilitate the collaboration over the years. Business community is very actively involved in this effort, and so we have foundation support, business support, corporate support, and of course the support of our local school systems as well as community-based organizations. I'm going to skip now to just go on the local level. With our Race to the Top application, we want to make sure that we have greater local leadership that provides action agendas in terms of implementing a number of the initiatives that we articulated in our application in Race to the Top. And we also wanted to make sure that specific issues to early childhood education in the communities is being addressed, especially in Baltimore City or some of the low-income neighborhoods on the Eastern Shore or Western Maryland, which are more rural in nature. And here you can see a number of other initiatives that help us really facilitate the efforts at the local level. I spoke about the public support that we received. NECASE, which is a Baltimore-based organization, has been extremely helpful. And Baltimore is known as a financial hub, and so we get a lot of support from the banking industry. How is the success being measured? And you just saw the first slide that I showed you was our school readiness information that we've collected over the last 10 years. In fact, it was really the impetus of making sure that with the inputs, in other words, the kind of quality initiatives that we put in place over the years, we can actually see outcomes that are beneficial to our young children and to their families. We also have measures that are specifically designed for children with disabilities. That's our early childhood accountability system, and this really was prompted by a federal initiative out of the U.S. Department of Education. We also have established an early childhood data warehouse that's tied to the longitudinal data system. That's going to tell us long-term as to how the investment in early childhood education is giving us long-term gains. We also have, especially with our governor, Governor O'Malley, who is very much interested in establishing data systems to tell us and inform us as to what policies need to be put in place. We have management for results and other state stat systems that help us monitor our progress. These are just quality measures that relate to the management for results. I think one of the reasons why we were so successful with the data that you've seen and with the increased number of children being ready for school is the fact that we have really focused on quality improvement in programs and making sure that our workforce works on best practices to support early learning standards. Here's a number of accredited programs and the increase that we've seen over the years in our public pre-kindergarten programs, child care, family child care, and Head Start centers. We accept national accrediting bodies such as NEYC or Middle States Early Learning Years, but we have established our own accreditation system within the state using state standards. Professional development, we've really expanded our professional development efforts on taking research-based practices to the practitioner, making sure that some of the early learning standards don't become abstract knowledge to them, but then how they can support children to meet those standards. The Race to the Top application, very quickly, is very similar to what you have heard from Ohio. I talked about the early learning councils. Our effort in Maryland will be to narrow the school readiness gap by focusing our resources from the Race to the Top funding. It's $50 million for the state of Maryland to low-income neighborhoods. We want to make sure that access to high-quality programs is available in low-income neighborhoods, and that means to us attendance areas, Title I attendance areas, and especially Title I schools that are in school improvement. We want to make sure that children coming into these schools have the necessary skills to do well in school. That would not only support the children, but it would support the schools as they are working toward meeting those accountability standards that have been in place for some time. We also want to make sure that the early learning standards are aligned to the Common Core standards. That's something very important to Maryland. And as you mentioned, as we heard about Ohio's presentation, we're working with them on a comprehensive assessment system. And here's some more information. We have lots of information available online, and of course we will be available for any follow-up questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rolf. That was terrific. I don't know how you covered the last decade so quickly. Thank you. I really appreciate that. So I'm going to just make a couple of remarks to pull these together a little bit, and then we'll take questions of both Stephanie and Rolf. As I was listening to the presentations, I think there were a couple of themes that came out of these that I think are really great takeaways for everyone. One of them is the use of research and science, which was brought up by pretty much every speaker, particularly emphasized by Representative Kagi in Washington. The use of partnerships, people talked about them in terms of business partnerships, local partnerships, community, and even between states. So I think the partnership theme was a really interesting one and one for policymakers to think about.
Hello?
Hi, we're on a webinar right now. Can you mute your line?
Yeah.
Thank you. And then the last one is really thinking about how to get enough data to know how you're doing and how the children in your state are doing. And Ohio talked about child identifiers. Maryland has a long history of having collected good data on their children. So those are good themes, I think. All right, so I'm going to pass it over to Julie, who's going to run the question and answer portion of the webinar.
Thank you, Stephanie. So we're now going to open up the lines to see if we have any questions from our participants of the three presenters that are still on the call. So I'm going to ask the operator to come back on and remind the participants of how they go about asking a question, either through the webinar technology or online or on the audio.
Thank you. If you would like to ask a question using the chat feature, you may simply type your message into the box located on the lower right-hand side of your screen, then click on the Send button. If you would like to ask a question by phone, please press *1 on your telephone keypad at this time. That's *1 to ask a question. We do have a question from Mimi Aledo Sandoval of New Mexico. Please state your question.
Yes, hi. Thank you for this webinar. I was wondering if Stephanie Siddons can talk a little bit more about the targeted funding for child care programs that are higher quality.
Sure. What we have implemented is a process where we provide higher reimbursement rate for child care based on the level of quality in our tiered quality rating improvement system. So we in Ohio have something called Step Up to Quality, which has 3 steps or tiers of quality that are based on a set of program standards that deal with teacher credentials, adult-child ratio, the extent standards and assessments are utilized in the classroom, extent professional development is hours are obtained by staff, and so programs are then placed in tiers of quality based on their accomplishments in those areas. And so as programs achieve a certain level of quality, then they have a higher percentage reimbursement rate based on that level of quality, and then that reimbursement rate, that higher level of reimbursement is maintained if they maintain the level of quality. So that is what has been implemented most recently, and then as we go into our new Early Learning Challenge grant, we'll actually be expanding to 5 tiers for a new and then expanded program standards, and then additional types of programs would be participating. So part of our research moving forward will be to determine what incentives we continue to provide for programs and at what level. So hope that answers your question.
Thank you. The next question is from Assemblywoman Lucy Flores of Nevada. Please state your question.
Hi, thank you. My question was for Rolf, and it was regarding the, the consolidation that was done under one agency, which was the Department of Ed. And I'm just wondering what the structure was like prior to doing that, or if it's always been under the Department of Ed in that way, and whether or not there was any challenges associated with some of the departments potentially not wanting to let go of their particular program. The reason why I ask is because in Nevada we do have it really spread out across departments. We have Health and Human Services that does some things, Department of Ed does others. And I think that, from a probably just a layman's perspective, it kind of makes sense to consolidate under one so that different agencies aren't, getting lost and not communicating with each other. So being that your state is doing that, what were the challenges, if any, associated with putting them all under the Department of Education?
Thanks for the question, because this is a real important topic. For us, the challenges were basically looking at ways in how the child care functions that were with the Department of Human Resources could be transferred to the Department of Education without overburdening the Department of Education in terms of handling some of the functions that they have not done in the past. I'll give you an example. Licensing, for instance, was not a typical responsibility with the Department of Education, and neither was child care subsidy. So in order to do this, the legislature actually offered it as a two-step approach. And over 2 years, phased in the licensing and the quality initiatives first, and then provided through a work study a way to facilitate the transfer of the child care subsidy the following year. I think that was helpful from the receiving end, being here with the Department of Education, being able to set up the infrastructure for those new functions that we had, and therefore not establishing some kind of gridlock that would really impede a successful transfer or transition, but doing it, that really helped. A very curious aspect of it was that it was the child care community that advocated for the transfer. They went to the legislature and wanted to see those functions transferred to the department because they felt it was important that the early learning needs of young children be better addressed than they were addressed in the past through the Department of Human Resources. The other functions that are related to home visiting and to some of the quality initiatives or the Head Start Collaboration Office were already part of the Department of Education at that time. And so it was really in 2005 getting child care and especially the funding and the policy piece over to the department. As part of it, the department established a new division of early childhood development and therefore raised the stature of early childhood within the department. So what that did really in terms of policy is established an education mandate under the Department of Education and the state board from birth to grade 12. And that is a major shift. A similar shift, however, was not done at the local level. So there are still some issues that need to be resolved at the local level, make sure that the schools working hand in hand with the early childhood community. And that's why we wanted to have these 24 councils at the local level to facilitate some of that transition of children coming into school.
Does that complete your question, Ms. Flores?
It does. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next question is from Terry Huntington. Please state your question.
Thank you. It's Terry Huntington. And listening to the information regarding early childhood education and our state in Kansas, we are cutting back. Most of our programs are funded along with state dollars or federal dollars by the Master Tobacco Settlement dollars. So knowing that we may not have those funds, you mentioned that you had partnerships and buy-in from community businesses and other groups. How did you establish those relationships?
And that actually could go to both Rolf and Stephanie.
Sure.
So this is Stephanie. I'll start. In Ohio, we have one key relationship has been with our Ohio Business Roundtable, which is made up of a number of businesses throughout the state of Ohio. And they actually produced something called the Talent Challenge 2 document that may be of interest to you. I think it's posted on their website. I can get that information to Julie and Stephanie. But They actually wrote a document that really stressed the importance of focusing on kindergarten readiness and the importance of public-private sector partnerships. And so they have really taken this on as an area of focus for their business members. And so they were instrumental in actually working with us to write our Early Learning Challenge Grant application. They're instrumental in making connections to local community businesses and partnerships at the local level. So that's one way. And then they also work closely with the governor's office as well as state agencies. So it's been a really productive relationship. They really know how to bring unique, different perspectives, private sector perspectives to the table, to the conversation, and resources for us to think a little bit differently about things. And so that's kind of a recent example in our state that has been extremely effective.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to say for Maryland just briefly is it's very important, especially when you go through a consolidation, to make sure that you have all various partners involved in the process and have them involved in some of the decision making, or get them involved in at least given them an opportunity to provide feedback. What we've done with the advocacy community, especially through our advisory council structure, make sure that the nonprofit organizations, those that have a vested interest in early childhood, among them the providers, are immediately involved after the transfer in a strategic planning process. In fact, that was the way to get the community engaged. We basically reflected back to them and said, that was your goal, to get this consolidated. Now give us a 5-year vision of what you would like to see the early care and education system look like. And that really got them engaged, and that was a considerable buy-in that really helped to establish a platform from which we could work. And we're not at risk for some major fragmentation, which would have been really undermined our efforts. The business community, let me just say that with the banking industry here, especially with PNC and the Grow Up Great initiative, we have really joined hands with them in order to make sure that their initiative supports the overall strategic goals of our statewide early childhood efforts. PNC very much involved with the Business Roundtable, in particular Ready at 5, that works with us on a number of initiatives. And the foundation world is very much interested in supporting efforts and buttress some of the things that are important to them as part of their missions, and making sure that it is aligned with the mission of the state. Casey comes to mind, the Weinberg Foundation, and even corporations such as Northrop Grumman involved in STEM initiatives. These are the kinds of things that help us in our efforts to get it to the business community.
Thank you.
The next question is from Robin Gable of Illinois. Please state your question.
Hi, thank you, and thank you for all this information. I was just wondering, I know in Illinois we've recognized one of our problems is in this child care credentialing and a career ladder for folks. We seem to have a disconnect between the second-year, 2-year colleges and the 4-year colleges. I was wondering if any of you have had any experience with this.
Okay, this is Rolf from Maryland. Just wanted to say we've 7 years ago, I believe, established an AAT in early childhood education. That's a pretty standard policy tool used to get people, sort of get them affordable opportunity to go into teacher education by starting out at a community college, going into an AAT of early childhood, get the associate's degree, and then without further review and by meeting certain grade level expectations, could then transition into a teacher prep program within a 4-year college. We have started the process. There's been quite a bit of traffic in it, but we have seen some disconnect with some of the colleges not accepting the kind of policy that we established statewide. But in general, it served as a functioning tool to get people into the pipeline and get their four-year degree in, say, in early childhood education, which then could set them up to get their state licensure for teaching. As far as the career ladder in the child care workforce, we've basically established a career ladder that starts with an aide, for instance, having 45 clock hours of training, past high school diploma, to a master's degree in early childhood education. So as those in the workforce come into the career ladder, they can really move from the first to the sixth level, which is the one that represents the group of degreed professionals in the field. And that has really worked for us because over time we have really seen the movement going up to the levels 4+, 5, and 6, which are the better qualified childcare professionals. So that's really worked with us. Now, the community colleges tend to be more involved in the career ladder policy and practices than our four-year colleges. But in our Race to the Top application, we're trying to address that to some extent.
Thank you so much, Rolf, and thanks for the question, Representative Gable. So I'm cognizant of the time. We are reaching the end of it. What I wanted to say is I know there's other questions in the queue at the moment, and what I would love to do is have you email those questions to Julie, and we will email them to the appropriate person, whether it's Stephanie or Rolf. And then what I'd really like to do is share the answers with the whole listserv, so we'll be able to get both the questions and the answers out to everyone. We don't have additional time right now for questions. I do want to make a note about Rolf and his participation with the Early Learning Fellows. He is a faculty member, so has agreed to take questions throughout the year from the fellows. So you now have a sense of Maryland and their progress and some of their initiatives and strategies. And so he'd be open to additional questions throughout the year. So we thank him for being a faculty member as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Julie to close us out for today.
Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, just two things I want to mention real quick, and that is today's handouts will be on the website that you'll have access to, and all of the other resources are available there. So we'll send something out on the listserv just to remind you of where those are. And then also we're planning on sending out an evaluation survey to get your feedback, just to make sure that we know that we're on track with these webinars and the technology and so forth. And so with that, I want to thank the speakers today for being on the call and taking their time to share their ideas, thoughts, and their work with us. And I also want to thank all the great questions that we had from our fellows. This was great. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye.
And I'm actually going to just say one last word because you won't hear Julie on our next call. She's going to be on maternity leave, so we'll all wish her well. Thank you all for a great call this afternoon, and we'll be back in touch with you. Thank you.
Thanks.